Welcome to this tutorial. My name is Xander. Now this tutorial is part of our Express.js Prisma ORM Query Fundamentals course. You can access this course playlist available for free on YouTube. For deeper learning, the full course is available for purchase at Udemy. Find all the resources and links in this video's description. Now don't forget to subscribe to the channel for weekly promotions, discounts, and Udemy course giveaways. Right, so now we've set up the database container in the previous tutorial. Let's take a look at now how to set up Express and Prisma within a Docker container. Right, so the traditional approach might be to, let's imagine this is a Visual Studio Code on our local machine. We go ahead and we start to build our project, and all of the files are saved locally. Whenever we run our Express application, it's going to run locally on our machine. And then what we might have is that local application that's running locally on our machine will connect to our database container to manage data. So what we're going to do here is that we're going to run everything inside of containers. We will continue developing the application inside of Visual Studio Code. And yes, the actual application code will be stored locally. So that will remain the same, except for now, this code will be connected to a container where we will be running Express. So in actual fact, when we run our Express application, it's going to be run from our container. And of course, that container is going to be connected to our database container so that we can interact with the database. So this means in this course, whenever you download any of the code, source code connected to any modules and open it up in Visual Studio Code, when you run that Docker up command, it means that your environment that you're working with is going to be exactly the same as the one that I'm working on throughout the course. And that will avoid potentially any issues, any problems that might occur if we were to actually run Express locally on our machine. You will be using exactly the same versions of the database and Node.js on the containers, as well as using the exact same code that we will be creating in this course. So hopefully that's going to provide a much cleaner, easier experience for you to get started with the code in any module of this course. As we move deeper into this course, we'll learn more about automating this approach to automatically create our database, add the tables, add the data into the tables so that we can just concentrate purely on learning the core concepts introduced in this course. Right, so let's open up the Docker Compose file. Now we're going to create a new service under the Postgres service. So this is going to be called Express API. That's what I've called this service. You can go ahead and change it if you like. Don't forget it should be indented in line with the previous service Postgres there. And what we're going to need here then is we're going to change the build slightly. Whereas previously we just simply downloaded the image, what we're going to need to do here potentially is prepare the image slightly differently. So images can be changed. You can add and manipulate the image to prepare it for your particular scenario. And that's what we're going to do here. We need to install some dependencies so that we can start working with Express and Prisma inside of our container. So context dot, I'll explain that shortly, and that'll make a little bit more sense once we create a Docker file. But let's continue now and create a container name. So I've just called this Express API. You can change that if you like. It restarts always in case it stops for some particular reason. Docker is going to try and restart it. And then let's open some ports. So by default, Express is going to be accessible via port 3000. So I've opened that port up, mapped it across so that we can access our Express service. And we're going to have a look at Prisma Studio. And that requires port 555. So again, I've just opened that door up to the container so that we can access that service on our container. Once we've done that, let's go ahead and add depends on. So this is just going to ensure that Postgres is started before Express, because obviously Express requires a database. So we're going to need to make sure that the database exists before we start Express. Otherwise, it's probably no point bringing up Express, right? So let's set that in place. And then we've got an environment variable here. Now, this is the connection string to the database. So what we're doing here is we're going to set up this environment variable, which is going to be accessible by our application inside of the container. And this is how we're going to connect to our database. So if you remember previously, I used these interesting names of my user, my password, my database. And I did that on purpose so that you can see where they fit into this connection string to connect to our Postgres database. So this provides the instruction for our application to connect to the database. So my user, my password, and then it finds the database. So here we use the name Postgres, which is a name for the service. So we can actually access the service via the name of the service in Docker. And that's what we've done there. And this is the port that it uses. And then the database that we're using is called my database. Okay, so once that's done, let's create some volumes. Right, so we're going to create 2 volumes here, because what we want to do is we want to be able to work with code locally, actually create the code locally, but we want that to be mapped across to our container so it can also be run via the container. So what we've done here is we've created a bind mount. Okay, so in Docker, this is a type of volume that allows us to link a directory from the host machine to the directory inside of the container. So in our case, we have all of our code here locally. So this is all our code locally, and obviously we can edit this code using VS Code. That's how we're going to create code. And what we're doing is we're mapping this folder with the code over to the container. So the container that we're going to create, there will be a mirror of this code, which means that anytime we update the code locally, it will get updated in the container. And anytime we update it in the container, it will also then get updated locally. So that's how we're going to share code locally to the container. Right, so this is what we have here, .express API /app. Right, so what we're going to need to do is create a new folder here, initially called express .api. Now, through this course, when you download the source code connected to modules, this will already be created, of course. So that's my folder. Right, so I'm mapping this folder. So the dot here refers to the current directory of this Docker Compose file. Dot, that's the current directory here. Dot slash referring to a folder, and then the name of the folder, in this case, Express API. Right, so then we have this colon. So after the colon, we describe where we want to map this to in the container. So in the container, we're mapping this folder, Express folder, to the folder called app in the container. Right, so next up, we create this volume here. So this named volume. So this is used to let Docker manage dependencies and avoid host container conflicts. So without it, your container might lose access to its dependencies, and with it, node module stays inside the container, preventing any conflicts and missing packages. So generally, it's the best practice for consistent and stable Dockerized Node.js development. Now, I do apologize, that is not easy to explain why we've added that there, particularly if you are new to this development process and using Express in general. Generally, you'll be happy that it's there, and maybe you can make a note of it, and as we work through further, things will start to click in place. Right, so now we need to customize an image, download an image and customize it for our needs. So if you remember what we did previously, we defined in the build here context dot. So this dot refers to the current directory or the same level as our Docker Compose file. And what's Docker going to do is Docker is going to look at this, and then it's going to look by default for the Docker file. So I've created a new Docker file, capital D, Docker file, no file extension. And inside of here, we now need to describe and build our image in preparation to turn it into a container. So first of all, we use the official Node.js image. So have a look at Docker Hub if you like. The latest version as of recording is 23. So I'm using an Alpine version. Now here, Alpine refers to an Alpine Linux, which is a lightweight Linux distribution designed for security and efficiency. So Alpine-based images are very popular because they are generally smaller than the official image. or the official default image. So it probably doesn't have all the other features that some of the other images have. So you'll need to research into that if there were specific features that you need from Node, but this should provide us everything we need to get started with Express and building our API endpoints. Right, so now what we need to do is define in the image our working directory. So here we're saying inside of this image, this is going to be the directory we use to create our code or store the application code and to generally work from while the container is running. So that's our working directory. So what we're going to need to do here is customize this image, because in order for us to run our container and have everything prepared so that we can run our Express application, we're going to need to make sure that all the packages that we need is installed. So in this course, we're going to be using Prisma and of course Express. So Express is a fast, minimal and flexible web framework for Node.js. It helps us simplify building web applications and APIs by providing some easy to use tools for handling routes, middleware and request. And we're also going to be utilizing in this course Prisma, which is a database toolkit. It's going to help us simplify working with databases. It acts very much like an ORM, an object relational mapping tool, if you're familiar with that, which ultimately makes it easier for us to query and manage the database. So we're going to learn more, obviously, about that throughout this course. Essentially, it's going to allow us to interact with the database. Now, typically what we would do when creating a new Express application is we would create it locally. And through that process, we'd create some files that's required to start it. But in this case, remember, we're going to run everything from the container. And there will be some initial setup that's required in order to get this working. At the moment, we've got this empty folder here. So we could manually create some files here, but we're going to work from the fact that we don't have any files here, and we're going to create from scratch everything, but from within the container. So what we're first going to do is run a command which is going to check to see if the package.json file exists inside of this folder. If it doesn't, then we're going to create it. That's what's happening here. Okay, so check to see if package.json exists. If it doesn't, we're going to run npm initialize, and that is going to automatically generate the package.json file, which is essential for managing the dependencies of our Node.js application. Okay, so that's in place. So we can now think about installing some dependencies, right? So let's go ahead and install the tools that we need. So that's going to be Express and Prisma. Okay, so those are the two main tools that we're going to be using. We will add some more later on, but let's just stick with Express and Prisma. That's going to provide us all the tools so that we can start to build and learn about database interactions. So to summarize, we're going to use this image here. We're then going to make sure that we have an app or work directory where we're going to store and manage our application from within the container. We're then going to make sure we have our package.json file so that we can manage packages that we install. And then we go ahead and install Express and Prisma. Those are the two packages that we're going to need to install. Remember, we're going to use Prisma to manage or interact with our database and Express as the web framework. So at this point, we can give it a go to see if it works. So we can simply use the Docker Compose up build. That should now, looks like we've got some problems here. Potentially in the indentation. So we're told here Express API refers to an undefined volume node modules. Apologies, haven't finished that yet. That's why. So back into the Docker Compose file here, what we need to do is specify the volume node modules. So at the end here, indented further to the left-hand side, so no indent here, volumes, we simply just specify node modules. So actually now we know that in actual fact, we're going to be using a node image because we are essentially building a Node.js project here. Now we know that this node modules folder in actual fact is a directory in a Node.js project that contains all of the installed dependencies or packages for your project. So what happens is that when we run our project, or when we run install, in a Node.js project, the dependencies list, let's go back here. So remember, this list here is going to list all the dependencies needed to run our application. Everything that's defined in here is going to be downloaded so that it can then prepare the environment for the application to run successfully. So what we're actually doing is we are installing all the dependencies on the container. We're not going to install those in the actual local machine here. And the reason why that is because this folder can contain hundreds or thousands of files if your project has many dependencies. So we're going to store that away from the container so that our container can use it and reuse it as and when we start or stop the container. And that can just help us with managing the dependencies, because like I said, there could be hundreds or thousands of files here. So that if we were to restart the container or stop our node container, it just means that they will persist and they don't need to be created again. And it just makes the whole process a whole lot easier to manage. Right, so now we've added volumes. Let's go back and rebuild again, see if there's any issues or problems. It looks like this time we are pulling the pulling down the image correctly and creating the image. And it looks like it has been built and it's started. So let's take a look. Now what you will find is that the Express container cannot start successfully yet, but I just wanted to show you this so you can see the spinning thingy, and then if we go into it, you can see we don't have anything in logs. The container isn't able to start yet. Right, so what we're going to need to do here is to actually create the project initially if it doesn't already exist in the folder. In this case, it doesn't. And if it does exist in the folder, we're simply going to use the code that's already there and start the project. So for this, what we're going to need to do is, first of all, check to see if the package.json file exists in the folder. Now, at the moment, it doesn't. That means that our application hasn't been started or initiated. So we're going to need to first initiate the project. So let's go ahead and do that. So here we're going to create an if statement here. So we have if package file doesn't exist, then what we're going to do is just echo out project already exists, skipping setup. Okay, so if it does exist, that's what we're going to do. Project already exists, and we skip that. Now, if the package doesn't exist, then what we're going to do is echo project does not exist, and we're going to initialize it. So to initialize a new project, we're going to run npm initialize -y. Remember, this is happening on the container, right? So we initialize the project. Now, as soon as the project is initialized, a new file will exist here in Express folder. Remember, we're mapping across this folder to the container. So whatever happens in the container is going to happen here locally. So at this point, we've now created a new file, probably the package file. And then we'll go ahead and npx Prisma init. That's going to initialize Prisma in the container. Okay, so once that's done, what we then need to do is to create a new file. So what we're going to do here is create a new file called index.js. Now you can call this app.js if you prefer. Here in this course, I'm just going to call it JS index.js. If this doesn't exist in the folder, and of course here in this folder, then it's going to be created. And what we're doing here is we're going to create an initial file that is going to create a basic endpoint that we can access and just test to make sure everything is working. So we're going to use Express. So this is basically printing the commands to the file, and we'll inspect the file shortly and explain it in more detail. But this is going to print this code to this file that's going to be created index.js, which is going to appear in this folder. So that's all that's needed to actually create a new endpoint with Express. And then once that's done, we can then go ahead and start the Express app. So we run node.js, and then our application will start. Okay, so of course, if we do already have the package.json file because the project has already been set up in our folder, then it's just going to skip all this and then just start the Express app. So what we've done there is we've just automated the startup process of creating a new project. If the project has already been created or we are using source code that we've downloaded from any of the modules, then that's not going to happen. We're just going to start the Node.js server. Right, so with that in place, we can now just run Docker Compose up to rebuild that container, our Express container. And now you can see it's solid green. Looks like everything is running. We're told that it's running on port 3000, which is all good. It looks like everything is running successfully. So now what we can do is head over to our browser. Let's open up a new browser window, and we can type in localhost 3000, and there we go. So that's our new endpoint that we've just created. So what we have now is in the folder here, we have node modules, which is empty. So all the node modules will be managed by Docker. We have Prisma. So we have this new folder called Prisma, and this is where we're going to define the databases inside of Prisma, the database tables in Prisma. So we'll do that in the next module. And then down here, we have a few other files which we can ignore. So we have the environment variable. So that has our database information. So that's how we're going to connect to the database. And then we have our JS file that was automatically created in the Docker Compose process. So what's happened here briefly is that we are importing an instance of Express application and assigning it to an app constant. Okay, so that essentially starts Express, initializes Express application. And then what we can do is build upon that. So extend and build our first endpoint. So this is the endpoint location, and this is what is outputted. We've seen that already in the browser. And app listen 3000 console log, blah, blah, blah. All of that there is to set the route that handles a HTTP GET request to the, in this case, the root directory. We'll learn more about that as we start to build endpoints here in Express. So if you like, you can just test this out fully by deleting everything and just start completely from anew. So that'll take a few seconds to delete those containers. That seems to get longer and longer, that process of deleting containers, right? So we delete the images as well. So you don't need to do that, but just to showcase the fact that this should work. So we run our command again. It should pull down, download all the images, and then run the containers. Okay, so that's downloaded, that started, the containers look good, and then we can just test it again by refreshing our localhost column 3000 and hello Docker. We can test to make sure that that works. Because remember, this folder is being mapped across to our container. So anything we change here will change in the container. So let's say hello new course. So change that to hello new course. Now what I will need to do at this moment, and this will change throughout this course, I will show you how to do this, but we will need to quickly, not rebuild, but just restart the container. But I just use the same command because it's just convenient for now. So we just need to restart the containers because we made some code changes. Like I said, that won't be the case throughout this course. And if I refresh now, it says hello new course. And there we go. So that's an introduction. What we've done there is we set up a new Express project. We've done that purely and solely within a Docker container. So we now have a Docker container running both a Postgres database and an individual container now running our application code, Node.js, Express, and Prisma. So in the next module, we'll learn and build upon this. We'll learn how to create our tables for our database. And then we just need to expand the automation of our code slightly so that we can interact with features provided by Prisma.